Phil, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi,
How you
hi.
guys doing?
Welcome to Psychic Viewpoint. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's going to be fun. Thanks for having me
Yeah.
on.
Well, you know what? We got a lot of stuff to go over. First of all, tonight's show is about alchemy and, specifically Taoism and this type of alchemy. Can you define what that is for us, please?
Sure. First of all, to the average listener, I should probably say that that area of study is extremely vast. But generally, for the purposes that we'll be talking about here tonight, you could probably divide alchemy from the Taoist tradition into two camps. There were those that wanted to transform themselves into higher spiritual states with medicine, like potions and elixirs and things that they concocted. And that was a very high art that was known in China for a long time. But then that kind of puts you in a position where you need access to external substances in order to get the effects. But there was
Right.
another branch of Taoism that was, and there's many different branches of Taoism that each specialize in different aspects. It wasn't all alchemical, but the particular tradition that I got involved in has a very ancient lineage that goes back into aspects that require a person to transform themselves from the inside out using substances that are already available within your own body, and that these could be cultivated through internal practices that a person already had within them through certain breathings and meditation practices, and sort of rebooting up these forgotten channels of energy in our psychic anatomy. They were able to allow these transformations to take place from within themselves, which is kind of nice because then you can bring it with you wherever you go. You don't have to wonder if you're out of your area, if you're going to get access to the medicines that other alchemists would have to do. But probably at this point it would be most simple to give a general description of what alchemy is, because there's many different forms and different traditions don't always agree. But in terms of spiritual progress and past work like that we're going to talk about tonight, I think that it's important to emphasize that alchemy is how should I say, it's the art of imitating and accelerating nature. It's a natural art and science. And in alchemy, a person really doesn't end up making anything. All an alchemist would do, or in this case, the spiritual aspirant that is accessing these means from within themselves, is what we do is we provide a condition for nature to do what nature does, and what nature has always done. And so the end result of this, what some would call the philosopher's stone, if you're into the laboratory alchemists, or in our case, getting the ultimate attainment, which would be self-realization or awakening, it's not really made by us, the alchemists, it's made by nature. All we do is provide the conditions within ourselves so that nature can operate effectively and without being disturbed. And so, in this case, you allow nature to do what nature already does and only knows how to do, but through these practices, you get your mind out of the way and allow your access to that one law of nature to start coursing through you, and the rest just sort of takes place all by itself. So when nature is finished doing what it does all day long, what it's doing is it's constantly evolving itself. It's constantly transforming from one form into another. And that's what spiritual development is. You no longer become the person you used to be. You have literally transformed yourself from the inside out, from a subatomic level outward into the physical, and even beyond that, into something entirely new. And that's alchemy. So alchemy, therefore, is the art of the microcosm and the acceleration of nature through the microcosm, that microcosm being our body and our mind and our spirit. And so in this practice that we're going to talk about tonight, which we call the Kunlun system, that substance that we begin with is our body, mind, and spirit. And what we do is we begin to purify that body and that mind and that spirit until we realize our divine self. It's already there. We're the alchemical Taoists of this tradition already knew that humanity was awakened. We just forgot because we've clouded our vision of ourselves and our light with so many false beliefs and traumas and buying into the illusion that we call the world as being real, that we can't see our own light anymore. Well, these practices that are part of this system, which are very simple to do, what they do is they strip away what is no longer needed, no longer necessary. And as you began to do that, you began to see more and more of your true essence, which is the end result of alchemy. You purify and distill yourself through these practices until there's nothing left but your pure essence. And that essence is divine. And then you realize that you're not a human being in a flesh and bone body anymore. You're much more than that. We see in the mirror what 1% of what we are. And so in this case, internal alchemy is that branch of Taoism that uses the observation of nature and then allows nature to run its course through us by getting out of our way, getting our ego out of the way, and accessing it through certain practices that we introduce in the work.
Well, let me ask this about the Kundalini system. Where is it from, and how did it get here? And by here, I mean to the West.
Sure. Well, first of all, we're calling it tonight the Kundalini system because that's the name given it, because we have to call it something. These practices are very old, and they historically were practiced very secretly within mainly two different temples or branches of Taoism, one being what they called the Kunlun branch and another the Mao Shan. And those are some of the more secretive and esoteric of the Taoist areas of philosophy and spiritual practice. And their work wasn't really written down. It was an oral tradition. So if you try and find studies about it or manuscripts and that sort of thing, they don't exist. It was so simple but so powerful that in some cases wars were even fought over its secrets. To get them was to get the highest attainment. And so they were safeguarded like many of the mystery schools. And what my teacher did, and his name is Max Christensen, and he's generally considered the main proponent and bringer of this system out of China to the West. He was able to solidify and recodify a lot of the most powerful practices for the Westerner so that the average person could attain these states without having to spend 40, 50, 60 years doing traditional meditations, because we don't have that time now. The planet doesn't have that time. We don't have that time. So we had to call it something, and he wanted it to be symbolic of the past and as well as pay homage to all of his teachers. And so he called it the Kunlun system, which is named after the Kunlun mountain range, which was on the northern border of Tibet and western China. China now took over Tibet, but it's the Taoist version of Shambhala. If you know about the legend of Shambhala, you know that the Kunlun Mountains are always close at hand when you start talking about that mystical place, because many people believe it was in or around the Kunlun Mountains, which are still today very remote. But many of his teachers came from there, and the Kunlun Mountains are synonymous with immortality. And what this is, literally, is an immortality practice. When you apply it in a certain way and with enough diligence, you can actually reverse what we would call aging, and you can regenerate yourself from the inside out, because you're tapping into an inexhaustible source of energy from within yourself as opposed to trying to pull it in from outside yourself. So the Kunlun name is based on the mountain range, and it is the home of the immortals that are still supposed to live there today, in the physical. And it's also a way of representing the ultimate in the path. The top of the mountain is the crown. It's the end result of one's alchemical transformation. And he wanted to pay homage to all his teachers without singling one out and ignoring the rest. So we call it the Kunlun system because it is a system of practices. And he was allowed to bring it out of China, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. I'm sure other adepts had secretly come here, but they didn't really spread it. It's a tradition that's kept to itself for various reasons. It's very traditional. But every 100 years, according to Max, they allowed 4 people to leave the temple and teach what they knew worldwide to those that were willing to learn, if they were sincere. And of those 4 people, 3 of them no longer teach, or they don't want to, or they decided to leave. And Max is the one who brought it out. He was able to teach some of us to spread these practices, because they're very simple to learn. It's another thing to master them, but they're very simple to learn. And a 4-year-old could do them. And I'd say it's been here maybe 15 years on a small level. And today, Max has probably trained about 100 of us around the world to give the beginning levels of this system.
Well, that brings me to my next question here, because we speak of Kundalini now as a practice, and yet often, we refer to it, or I've seen it referred to as an internal alchemy. And I was hoping maybe you could elaborate on that term a little bit, or maybe how Kundalini is an internal alchemy.
Sure. If you think of an alchemist, the mad scientist, we think of the alchemists as the medieval old men in their laboratories in Europe transforming base metal into gold. And we think, well, they're just after a free lunch, let's make some gold and be rich. But it was a lot more than that. And what they were actually doing was they were studying the way in which matter, or the elements, change from one state into another. And if you were to start off with a junk piece of metal, like, say, lead, and you were able to transform it into the highest vibrational metal that the mystical traditions hold to be true, which is gold, that would be the ultimate attainment in that type of alchemy. But in watching how a substance transforms from a lower state to a higher state, a more refined state, a higher vibrational state, is exactly the same transformation that happens within the human physical body and in human consciousness when they are attempting to do their own spiritual practices. You start off as a body of flesh and bone, that you think reality is your 3D world, and you're subject to the laws of chemistry and physics and gravity and mind. But when you start doing these practices, which you cultivate from within yourself, not without, you slowly start to change over. You elementally change at the most profound and deepest level into a higher vibrational state. So you transform yourself from the body of lead, so to speak, into the body of gold. And that follows an alchemical pattern that is the same, whether you're a human or whether you're watching how nature transforms one substance into another. That happens all the time in nature. And the alchemists simply observed nature and then provided the conditions to make that happen. It's internal because we aren't looking outside ourselves for the power in which to do that. The early internal Taoists, internal alchemy Taoists of this order that became the Kunlun system, they were smart. They realized the outer world's an illusion. We hear the Hindus talk about Maya, and we hear that the world is an illusion, but what does that mean? Well, it just means that it's not what you think it is. It's a projection. And so in many of the energy cultivation systems, people are pulling in energy from the world, from the power of the sun, the power of the moon, the earth, the wind, the 5 elements. And you take this incredible power and you bring it into yourself. And it makes your body really strong, really healthy. You can do incredible things. But it wasn't necessarily designed to give you awakening. You are looking outside of yourself and pulling in the power of nature and bringing it into your body. But the internal alchemists of this lineage said, wait a minute, the outer world of form is an illusion. It doesn't exist. It's just a projection of my subconscious mind. The universe outside me is a reflection of the universe inside me. And that power is what we would call the Tao, or God, or the one law that runs through all things. Others might call it scalar energy, or the energy of the vacuum, or unconditional love. But it's that one force that permeates all things that are. And it's found within the human body in particular places that you can access. And in this tradition, we don't use chakras. That's a Hindu concept. We use energy centers in the body that we call the Dantian. And you have one in your belly, one in your heart, one in your head, that area. And the heart in particular is where we make the alchemy happen, because you have to balance all ingredients in order to make these transformations occur, whether you're working in a lab or working in your own body. But the internal alchemy Taoists of this lineage, which, as I said, mainly come from the Mao Shan and Kunlun branch of Taoism, they said, wait a minute, the source is within, that power. So why not access that and emanate it outward from myself, rather than look outwards to the illusion that I know is illusory and pulling in energy from the illusion. This way they became independent of any outside forces. They learned to be their own master, their own beginning, their own end, and look inside themselves for that inexhaustible source, that inexhaustible power. And there's certain ways that you can access it in these practices that we introduce in the workshop. And when it happens, you'll know it.
Well, we'll definitely get to that in a bit. But first, I wonder if we could talk a bit about two, I guess we would call them forces, the Qigong and the Neigong. Forgive me if I mispronounce those, but what are those two forces, and are they fundamental to using the Kunlun or participating in the Kunlun system?
Well, Qigong sort of means energy cultivation, and Neigong means inner cultivation. I kind of touched on it a moment ago, but a lot of Qigong practices, you're pulling in the forces of nature and bringing it inside yourself. And it's really good for martial arts. It allows you to take incredible blows and go through a lot of rigorous things, and your body can withstand it because you make it so strong. But in Neigong, they weren't looking outside themselves to do that. They were looking inside themselves, and their purposes were for spiritual transformation, not for energy cultivation and martial arts training and that sort of thing. It was entirely an inner process, and its purposes were to transcend duality and perceive the reality as it actually is, which is based on unity consciousness, not polarity. So that kind of required a person to step out of the martial arts mindset, because in martial arts you're always training against an imaginary enemy. That's you versus an imaginary someone else. That's two-ness. That's duality. And you kind of have to give that up if you're going to start looking at the world as a unified whole. And so Neigong kind of has a spiritual application to it for the purpose of self-awakening. Qigong are a lot of practices that can bring on health, and like I said, martial arts training is good for that. It can reverse a lot of health conditions, but so can Neigong as well. It's just two different methods, but one is accessing the power within, okay, the infinite power within.
Which of these two forces do you focus on in your workshops, for example, and will the typical Kunlun aspirant be working with?
Well, we focus on the heart, and we draw out through particular ways energy that is accessed right from the void. And Qigong isn't a force, Neigong isn't a force. These are Chinese words that have to do with practices, types of practices, or types of cultivation of energy. And so in the class, what we're doing is we might use what in other systems might be Qigong practices, but we're internal cultivators. We have little changes to it that might appear subtle, but they make all the difference in the world. And what that does is it transforms it from an outer practice into an inner practice. And by putting our attention in certain places, well, that's where energy goes. Or in this case, it draws it out from our heart. And that heart is the portal to that one law, to that divine essence that permeates all things. So we really emphasize accessing certain parts of the body that are already hardwired to allow this to occur.
Well, that actually brings me to another consideration. I mean, what makes the Kunlun system different from all the other different types of systems of awakening, A, and then B, can I discipline myself and practice this system and still practice my yoga or trying to awaken my kundalini or my astral projection or what have you?
Sure. Well, it's the Kunlun system is considered a fairly rapid path relative to others, and that's one thing that makes it different compared to many traditional systems of awakening. Another reason that it's different in a huge way is that if you look at most of the different approaches to true awakening, the actual authentic paths, you're going to see that they utilize some form of fire, of what they call kundalini. And that's a force that they say lies dormant at the base of the spine. And if you've ever had the kundalini awakening, you know what I mean, because that's where it starts. And just like a flame, it rises. Hot air rises. Flame rises. And you'll feel it go up your spine. And it's considered hot. It's generally accessed in very forceful ways and techniques that make it happen, which is no problem if you're working under a master and who can watch and see if you're ready for certain powerful forms of energy, but it's considered hot. And a lot of the awakenings that happen that are taught in the world, not just in Asia but elsewhere, depend on that awakening up the spine. So it's very yang, it's very male, it's very hot. But there's another way, an opposite way, that starts at the top and flows downward, like water. What does water do? It's cool, it's yielding, it's soft, it flows downward. And it's a more gentler path, but if you read the Tao Te Ching, you'll see what Lao Tzu has to say about water. It's ultimately more powerful. And so this is a gentle system that requires allowance for your awakening to occur and non-doing, as opposed to actions and doings that make it happen and cause that awakening to happen from the base of the spine upwards. So we call this a water path. And for that reason, when you do these practices, your body begins to sort of form and mold itself to working with the system that you're working on. And the more you do it, the more efficient that process becomes, because the body learns what it's supposed to be doing, and your consciousness learns what it's supposed to be doing. But if you were to confuse it by adding in another powerful energy system that is of an opposite element, say fire versus water, you're just going to confuse your whole practice and your body. You'll make you'll compromise both, and you could end up with a third result by combining the two that may not be energetically pleasant. Because when that does happen, even according to Chinese medicine, there's no known cure. So Kundalini is fine for a practitioner that is on that path, and but they shouldn't mix it with a water path like this Kunlun system. It's an entirely different approach, and your body will accommodate whichever practice that you're working on. If you're going to do it, and a person's on the fence, like which one should I do? Give 3 months to one practice and practice it solely, nothing else. And then switch over to the other practice and don't combine the two, and give that one, say, 90 days and see how you feel. Not every one path is good for every single person. Everyone has their different needs, but after giving that equal way, a person will know which system is more compatible with their system. Other forms of powerful breath work that raise a lot of fire and heat in the body, or the Bikram yoga where you practice in hot temperatures. These generally aren't a good idea. Most forms of Qigong are okay. Kriya yoga is okay. Some of the gentler forms of White Tantra Kundalini, they're okay. But you generally want to separate those out by at least a day or two, so that you do not you don't interfere with the practices that you're trying to do with your Kunlun system. If people really knew how powerful the Kunlun system was and how comprehensive it was as a full path of awakening, they wouldn't feel the need to keep looking around for different paths. But I understand, in the West, we're being constantly revealed new paths that we didn't know existed, and it's fascinating. I like to learn new things, but after a while, you become a jack of all trades and a master of none. And after several years of workshops and trainings, when have you found time to actually just master one the right way? And for me, the older I get, I've narrowed down what I do to the most distilled, powerful thing that I can do that gives me the greatest benefit. And that's exactly why Max Christensen put together the method in this way, because we don't have the time. And if you can just learn to get your mind out of the way, this unfoldment can happen really quick, because it's a human birthright, and it has more to do with your attitude of practice than it does about any knowledge base that you have about awakening or metaphysics.
Is this why you would consider the Kunlun system a quick path? Because things speed up once I get my mind out of the way. Why is it considered a quick path in comparison to other systems?
Well, we're talking relatively speaking. Most of us have been incarnating on this planet for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So that's what I would call a long path. But what if certain things could be shown to you that made your efforts more efficient, and those ways were done by non-doing this as opposed to doing this, and not trying, but being or not being? That might accelerate things. And if it were possible for a person to achieve the highest attainment of this practice in one lifetime, relative to other practices out there, that would be a quick path. And that has been done. It's therefore, if you're an impatient person, it may not seem that quick, because the first thing that the Kunlun system works on when you're practicing is not the physical body. It has really nothing to do with the physical body, but because the physical body is an expression of the non-physical bodies, which it works on first, it eventually is going to reflect on the outer, what you've been working on the inner. And so a lot of people get fooled with the simplicity of this practice, thinking nothing's happening, but nothing could be further from the case. I fell into that trap. I began to practice this in 2008, and nothing happened. Didn't feel a thing. And I got frustrated, and I quit. And then I met Max. And in working with me, he could see my frustration. And one of the things he told me was, you can't see inside you, but I can see inside you. You think nothing's happening, but there's a world of changes happening within you, and you're almost there. Just go home and practice. Now, I broke every rule in practice because I'm a mental person. I'm a guy, I think, I'm in my left brain, I like facts, I like information. And here I am in a very feminine kind of yin allowance path that forces me not to use my mind. Well, that kind of drove me crazy. So I went right into my habit mode, and I started looking for things. I started expecting things and assuming that it would look like this or look like that. And all that did was push the real thing further from me. It's when I finally gave up. And I mean, I gave up. I sat down for the 1,000,000th time to do my practices, and I was just empty. It's like, oh, here we go again. Let's do my practices. And all of a sudden, I started a process of what we call purification. And that is one of the hallmarks of this system, because when you access the power of the divine and you don't try and stop it with your mind by analyzing it and allow it to run its course through its natural means, because that's what an internal alchemist does, right? We provide the platform and the conditions for nature to do what nature does, which is to evolve and transform. You'll start to have anything that doesn't serve you start to get thrown out of your system. Mental garbage, emotional garbage, cellular trauma, your karmas, whatever you want to call the denser parts of your being that are lodged somewhere in your multidimensional self. This energy of the one, of the oneness, of the Tao, when it's coursing through you, it starts a sort of a cascading effect that all you have to do is stand out of your way. And you'll begin to change. What does that look like? Well, it depends. Everyone's different. And what brought them to the spiritual path is a unique story. And so this unfolding kind of happens different for each person. But a lot of people get very hot. They get cold. They might laugh. They might cry. And all these things are your body's wisdom balancing out things that it's been suppressing its whole life. And it's time to get it out. And you feel like $1,000,000 afterwards. But in order to do it, you have to get your mind out of the way and just be and just allow. And for that reason, women really like the Kunlun system, because they're already hardwired to be yielding and surrendering. They don't need logic and facts. They just want to feel. And this whole practice is based on feeling and no mind. If you try and analyze it, you're just going to hold your evolvement back further. So it really forces you to develop both sides of your brain and merge the polar opposites that are the human being, your male and female, your yin and yang, your mind and heart, back together in a type of balance, because it's only when those forces are balanced that you can transcend this world and transcend yourself. That's what an alchemist is trying to do, is balance a number of different aspects in the ingredients in such a way that it allows transformation to occur automatically. So you don't have to think about it. I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of started going off there.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, your answer sort of led me into my next question, because obviously being able to unite polarities into a functional whole has to carry with it a lot of different advantages and benefits. So what can you tell me of some of the benefits that might happen from practicing the system?
Well, what's a benefit to one person might not be of interest to another. The traditions of the East minutely classified every level of spiritual development, down to the nth degree. And so they've classified different forms of awakening, spiritual awakening. And in the West, we still are kind of learning that. We as a culture aren't 5,000 years old like the Chinese. And so some people, their form of awakening is just to get healthy. Others, it's to attain the ultimate. They want to go home. They want to go home to God. Others want to have more peace in their life, or they want to feel more grounded. This is a great practice, by the way, since this is psychic access talk radio. This is a great practice for clairvoyance and people with psychic gifts that are on more the extreme side that actually have reputations, because they use a tremendous amount of chi. But a lot of times they're not grounded. After their work is done, their spiritual work with clients and whatever, they're shot, they're depleted. And they're often not grounded in their everyday life because they're so out the crown. They're off in the astral all the time. Well, you can't get awakening that way. You might be blissed out a lot of the time, but if you're going to grow your branches to the sky, you've got to develop strong roots or you'll topple over. So we emphasize a lot of grounding here. And that really helps put people back in their body. They sleep better. They can manage their worldly affairs a lot better, because at some point you have to come back to earth. So to such a person like that, that's a benefit, being grounded, being in your body, being able to feel your body, being able to sleep better at night, and being able to increase your light so much that the little meanies that come and visit you at night can't get near you. So a lot of sensitive people, they don't know how to control their own energy. Well, they just haven't been taught, and this practice will do that. So that's a benefit. And I'm not a doctor here, so I can't make claims, but anecdotally, we see reversals of various conditions that are entirely preventable. But when you start learning how to bring in more life force into your body and hold it there through a very simple way that we teach, it begins to accumulate in you. So you can reverse certain conditions. You can regenerate your glands to such an extent that gray hair turns dark again, to such an extent that I have to tell women in their late 40s and early 50s, if you really get on this path, I have to tell you, you might start ovulating again. If you don't want kids, be aware. How come that happens? Because what we're doing is we are tapping in through certain portals, certain access points within us, divine energy, and we bring it forth through our practices. And that high-frequency power, what it does, one of the first things it does is it regenerates the glands and the hormones and all of that. It brings them back into balance. So people who start getting weak in energy, aging, and that sort of thing, you're starting to reverse that, because now you're infusing those glands, which are getting old and tired, with life force, and they begin to rebound. They begin to bring hormone levels up, and not only up, but in balance. Everything in an alchemist way is about balance. And so the way we approach the practices is when we work on the different centers in the body, and the body, mind, and spirit, they have to be in balance. And so that's another benefit of practice. In fact, if you were raised in this from birth, Max had some pretty amazing stories about the lifespans of some of the people he worked with that are almost at the edge of belief. But it's because these systems constantly regenerate yourself. And so you don't go through the normal breakdown of entropy of systems like we see in chemical reactions. You are tapping into an inexhaustible source, and if you want to stay around for a couple hundred years, that's why they call this an immortality practice. This is why it comes from the Kunlun Mountains, because that is the mountains of the immortals. And on a more physical level, you can lower blood pressure. You'll be more serene in your mind. You'll have stronger energy flow, more efficient bodily processes. You'll have less negativity, more smiles, less stress, greater joy. For some people, that's the awakening that they want. But for others, they want to go. They want to go as high as possible. They want to obtain the ultimate birthright that is ours as human beings to know. And that would require continuing to practice and letting go of your garbage, your mental junk, because those things are impure. And this system of practices that we teach, that boots them out of you. And the more you do that, the more you are going to find that you are not a physical, dense being. You are nothing but pure light and information. And once you really understand that, you're finished here. You don't really need to do the earth lessons anymore because you just figured out the game of life. And at that point, unless you want to stay and serve others from your compassion, you could choose to move on at a time chosen by you to higher levels of experience. And so to some, that's a benefit. Between that point and starting off on the path, yeah, you'll have more energy. You're going to feel very light, very brisk, and it is gentle because you decide what you want out of the practice. You decide when you want to practice and for how long. And because we teach several different methods in the workshop, if you just want grounding, well then do those. If you want to wake up dormant capacities in your brain, which are yours to do and cultivate if you want, we can do that. If you want to attain what they call the state of the gold dragon body, if you're a man, or gold phoenix body, if you're a woman, this is where you consciously transform into light. It's your light body. We don't have a word for it in the West, so we call it the light body. But the Taoists called it the gold dragon body, or the indestructible diamond body. And the Tibetans called it the rainbow body. So different cultures through different times have different names for it. The body of Ra, the Merkaba, lots of different names. But it's a way of when you realize that your mind simply is projecting the entire world that you see, because that's its job, to interpret what it believes to be true, and you start having inner experiences that show you the true nature of reality, well, your brain's going to catch up. It's going to say, oh, okay, I understand now through these practices what's really real. And it starts interpreting your life through a different kind of lens. And you realize that life is not what you thought, and it's a whole lot more. And that's kind of what Wayne Dyer meant when he said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Well, that's true. That's true. And so those are some of the benefits that come. But in the beginning, you're going to process a lot of garbage that you don't want. The monkey that's been on your back your whole life, all of your wounds and issues, the dreadful things that were done to you, the things you did to others. One of the challenges that we have in life is you have to live and love yourself no matter what. And these practices will allow you to do that, but it doesn't mean you have to keep suffering. How does it look when it leaves your body? Well, you may shake. Shaking, animals do that. When they go through a trauma, what do? They go off and shake, and then they're okay. Well, that's a wise thing to do. Nature knows what to do. When we allow that to happen in us, you're actually shaking off discordant energies, disharmonic energies. And once they're gone forever. And eventually you keep doing these practices, those kinds of phenomena of getting really hot, getting really cold, some of the stranger things that can manifest during practice time, they'll stop. Now what happens is waves and waves of more and more happiness, which is really beyond happiness. They call it bliss and ecstasy. And once you've had that experience, you'll see that it can be an incapacitatingly beautiful kind of bliss, to the point where you don't want to become a bliss junkie. You have to still walk with your feet on the earth and come back down. And so we talk about that in the workshop and give practices to keep you grounded. But those are just some of the results of the practice, because that might be their goal. It may be all that they want. But the highest goal of the practice is self-awakening, direct knowing of one's true self.
Well, in the workshops, you've noticed some rather dramatic effects, and aside from some of the effects of practicing that you've just mentioned, would you like to comment or share some of your experiences that you had, for example, at the Rama Center with Steve, or in other of your workshops?
I can give a general kind of description only because if I give too much, people will start to have an expectation as to what it will be like for them, and I'd be doing them a disservice. I will say this, though. One of the things that the modern era of spiritual awakening doesn't like to talk a lot about is that, your spiritual unfoldment isn't always la happiness. And a lot of people that preach that, they're not grounded themselves. They're always out in the astral. They're not grounded, and sometimes that means you've got to face your own music, your own shadow side. And I had something really good I wanted to say, Stephen. What was it? Oh, effects of students. Right. Okay. I had lots of speaking going on in my head. All right. I'm back on track. So in the class, what happens is we teach several practices, but some are more, how shall I say, effective at doing things than others. And when you begin to purify yourself, this is what the Taoists call it, when you get rid of what's not needed, you're cleaning up your system of unneeded energies that aren't helpful to your awakening. Well, how does it look when it leaves your system? Some people are going to cry because they held back tears their whole life that they weren't allowed to shed. Other people are going to laugh because they held back laughing because it wasn't safe, or whatever. They may get really hot, which is normal, because your body's going to start throwing off physical toxins by the psychic heat generated in this practice. It wakes up all the nadis, wakes up all the chakras. It's infused with energy that courses through your nervous system, and it's going to open up all of your acupuncture meridians. It's going to open up your blood. Life force is going to flow through there, and if you've got toxins in there, it's going to come out. So heat is one of those things that can happen. Shaking, trembling in the legs, that's really common. That kind of shows you where your pineal and pituitary gland are at, by the way. And you may even speak in tongues. You may see inner lights. You may see manifestations, have visitations. But I don't really like to emphasize those things because it's not the purpose of the practice.
Right.
Those things are side effects. If I tell people that, they'll either sign up in droves because they want to experience that, or they'll run away in packs because they're scared of their own awakening. But any legitimate path is eventually going to make you come out of la-la land and bliss and deal with some of the stuff about yourself that you've never wanted to admit before. Any decent spiritual path that's real is eventually going to have you confront that part of yourself that you're ashamed about, fearful about, that you don't want to look at. And that's a good thing, because if you can be courageous and just face it, well, we talk about that in the class too. We show you how to transmute it from a fear, and poof, it's gone, and it's gone for good. And if you keep it up long enough, you're going to know yourself as a divine being. A person may they may find themselves, well, there's all kinds of phenomena that can happen. But when it happens, it's because the wisdom of the heart has taken over, and the adept is not getting in his own way, and it allows nature to take its course through you. And you'll come back to normal when you've balanced everything out. And that's kind of surprising for people because most people don't really know when they meditate or do a spiritual practice if it's really doing them any benefit at all. Well, I kind of wanted proof. I wanted to know if I was going to invest time in waking up and getting spiritual and all the rest of it. I wanted to know that the practices I was doing actually were paying dividends. And in a very dramatic way, when you're working with these ancient practices of the Kunlun system, you get to see, sometimes very dramatically, every time you sit down and move energy inside your body in a certain way, that it's actually paying off and that you are lighter for that experience, you've got less density around you, and you've actually come to Earth and started doing your path work by getting rid of what no longer needs you. I wanted that. And every time I do my practice, I get that proof. And that makes me feel good that my spiritual practice is actually paying dividends.
Well, Phil, we've come to the final 5 minutes of our show here. I want to remind everybody that you can actually find Phil at formlessandtrue.com. I highly recommend you go visit his website, learn about the Kunlun system, learn about what Phillip Laing is doing. I can definitely vouch for Phillip. He is right on the real deal. And my problem is that I live in a rural area, Phil. What do I have to do in order to get you to come out to Bohunk and the boondocks?
Well, it's true. You'd think with 100 teachers, we call ourselves apprentices all over the world, that there's something happening in your neighborhood. It's not always the case, but I do get asked a lot from people that feel the call. I do travel. Some of my colleagues, they do not. But I do travel. I've done the workshop in other countries, and I'll go with wherever there's interest because I just want to help people. So if they can't travel, and I do have a workshop coming up in the West Coast in Arcata, right in the heart of Redwood Country, at the beginning of March. And I've got one towards the East Coast in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is, I don't know, it's probably, an 8-hour drive for you? That's happening at the end of March. And if that's too far for people, they can just call me and say, I'd like to get a group together. Would you come out? And the answer will be yes.
So I can get to some of my friends, my club, my sewing group, my cooking club or whatever, get some people together, we all chip in and whatnot, and bring you out to our area, and you'll conduct a workshop there for us.
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's more interest than the cost of a plane ticket
right.
To make it worthwhile, sure. I've had groups up to 30 people, and that's always fun to have that many people doing this work at the same time because the energy gets pretty high. It's more fun than a barrel of monkeys. But if anyone has questions, my contact info is on the website, Formless and True, and I'd be more than happy to talk with them.
Well, you've got two big events coming up in the beginning and the end of March. One of those, I believe, is Kunlun system, and another one is also theta healing. You also are involved in theta healing. Can you briefly give us some information about that workshop as well?
Well, a lot of the things we talked about tonight, they're applicable in other areas. Not everyone feels the draw towards Eastern-type things, but Kunlun is just nature's way of life, and everyone's a part of nature. But theta healing is a way of calling on the divine to do healings on self or others. And it's a very interesting and very common workshop. I found that it cuts through all the dogma, just like the Kunlun system does, and it really promotes spiritual sovereignty because when you realize that you can call on the divine and incur change in the physical, whether it's in the form of healing or manifesting some other desired result, and you can do so from a singular unified heart space, which is what we do in the Theta Healing Workshop, then that's a good thing. And we are going to teach it in Knoxville, a basic level class and an advanced level class. There's more information on my website about that. But if you're interested in healing yourself or healing others or healing your world, Theta healing is a very approachable way for the average person to realize that it is also their divine birthright to know that they are much more able to do these things. It's not the realm of the mystics and the saints anymore because we are saints in the making. We're bodhisattvas in the making. It's just that no one told us that we could do these things. and we can.
Awesome. Well, Phil, I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. It has been educational. It's been illuminating, and I strongly encourage everyone to visit formlessandtrue.com, read up about the Kunlun system. You can find a lot more there. You can learn a lot more about Phil, and Phil, really, thanks a lot for coming here tonight and enlightening us. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And I should add, too, that there's a book out now on the Kunlun system by Max Christensen, and they can order that at primordialalchemist.com. You can order it through there or through Amazon. But if they're really intrigued with what they heard tonight, that is a very good book to have. And other than that, they're free to call me, and I thank you for having me on the show. It was fun. It's good to be back. It's been a while.
All right, guys, you heard it. primordialalchemy.com. You can pick up Max Christensen's book on Kunlun system. Formlessandtrue.com. You can learn more about Phillip Laing. Thank you very much, Phillip, and we'll see you next time, my friend.
Hello, my name is Res Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 6-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers, get access, psychic access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.
Accessing these means from within themselves is what we do is we provide a condition for nature to do what nature does, and what nature has always done. And so the end result of this, what some would call the philosopher's stone, if you're into the laboratory alchemists, or in our case, getting the ultimate attainment, which would be self-realization or awakening, it's not really made by us, the alchemists, it's made by nature. All we do is provide the conditions within ourselves so that nature can operate effectively and without being disturbed. And so, in this case, you allow nature to do what nature already does and only knows how to do, but through these practices, you get your mind out of the way and allow your access to that one law of nature to start coursing through you, and the rest just sort of takes place all by itself. So, when nature is finished doing what it does all day long, what it's doing is it's constantly evolving itself. It's constantly transforming from one form into another. And that's what spiritual development is. You no longer become the person you used to be. You have literally transformed yourself from the inside out, from a subatomic level outward into the physical, and even beyond that, into something entirely new. And that's alchemy. So alchemy gets into aspects that require a person to transform themselves from the inside out using substances that are already available within your own body, and that these could be cultivated through internal practices that a person already had within them through certain breathings and meditation practices, and sort of rebooting up these forgotten channels of energy in our psychic anatomy. They were able to allow these transformations to take place from within themselves, which is kind of nice because then you can bring it with you wherever you go. You don't have to wonder if you're out of your area if you're going to get access to the medicines that other alchemists would have to do. But probably at this point it would be most simple to give a general description of what alchemy is, because there's many different forms and different traditions don't always agree. But in terms of spiritual progress and past work like that we're going to talk about tonight, I think that it's important to emphasize that alchemy is the, how should I say, it's the art of imitating and accelerating nature. It's a natural art and science. And in alchemy, a person really doesn't end up making anything. All an alchemist would do, or in this case, the spiritual aspirant that is, therefore, is the art of the microcosm and the acceleration of nature through the microcosm, that microcosm being our body and our mind and our spirit. And so in this practice that we're going to talk about tonight, which we call the Kunlun system, that substance that we begin with is our body, mind, and spirit. And what we do is we begin to purify that body and that mind and that spirit until we realize our divine self. It's already there. the alchemical Taoists of this tradition already knew that humanity was awakened. We just forgot because we've clouded our vision of ourselves and our light with so many false beliefs and traumas and buying into the illusion that we call the world as being real, that we can't see our own light anymore. All these practices that are part of this system, which are very simple to do, what they do is they strip away what is no longer needed, no longer necessary. And as you began to do that, you began to see more and more of your true essence, which is the end result of alchemy. You purify and distill yourself through these practices until there's nothing left but your pure essence. And that essence is divine. And then you realize that you're not a human being in a flesh and bone body anymore. You're much more than that. We see in the mirror what 1% of what we are. And so in this case, internal alchemy is that branch of Taoism that uses the observation of nature and then allows nature to run its course through us by getting out of our way, getting our ego out of the way, and accessing it through certain practices that we introduce in the work.
Well, let me ask this about the Kundalini system. Where is it from, and how did it get here? And by here, I mean to the West.
Sure. Well, first of all, we're calling it tonight the Kundalini system because that's the name given it, because we have to call it something. These practices are very old, and they historically were practiced very secretly within mainly two different temples or branches of Taoism, one being what they called the Kunlun branch and another the Mao Shan. And those are some of the more secretive and esoteric of the Taoist areas of philosophy and spiritual practice. And their work wasn't really written down. It was an oral tradition. So if you try and find studies about it or manuscripts and that sort of thing, they don't exist. It was so simple but so powerful that in some cases wars were even fought over its secrets.
Phil, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi, welcome to Psychic Viewpoint. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's going to be fun. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you know what? We got a lot of stuff to go over. First of all, tonight's show is about alchemy and, specifically Taoism and this type of alchemy. Can you define what that is for us, please?
Sure. First of all, to the average listener, I should probably say that area of study is extremely vast. And but generally, for the purposes that we'll be talking about here tonight, you could probably divide alchemy from the Taoist tradition into two camps. There were those that wanted to transform themselves into higher spiritual states with medicine, like potions and elixirs and things that they concocted. And that was a very high art that was known in China for a long time. But then that kind of puts you in a position where you need access to external substances in order to get the effects. But there was another branch of Taoism that was, and there's many different branches of Taoism that each specialize in different aspects. It wasn't all alchemical, but the particular tradition that I got involved in has a very ancient lineage that goes back